Greetings. I'm Jessica Royer, and I'm a ministerial student with the Holmes Institute and the Centers for Spiritual Living. I'm honored to be leading our Wednesday services in the month of November. Tonight's title is Making Sense of Our World. Being brain aware helps us to understand ourselves and others. Oprah, who's one of the authors of this month's book, says, if we want to understand the oak, it's back to the acorn that we must go. So let's dive in. More than 130 million babies are born on this planet every year, arriving into a variety of circumstances ranging from joyful anticipation to grief and even dread, privilege or poverty, and all of the spaces in between. Regardless of their external circumstances, we know for sure that each of these little beings enters into this human realm as perfect, whole, and complete. Oprah writes in our book, What Happened to You? Quote, yet whether or not they're loved, every current and former newborn, which includes you and me, shares one profoundly important trait. Despite the myriad of circumstances into which we're born, we come into the world with an innate sense of wholeness. We don't begin our lives by asking, am I enough? Am I worthy? Am I deserving? Am I lovable? We are perfect little acorns when we arrive on this planet. And we immediately begin to have experiences with our world and the people in it. These experiences build upon each other in positive ways and sometimes negative ways. Some experiences are even traumatic. Experts in the mental health professions agree that all human beings experience trauma at some point in their lives. Every single human being, which includes you and me. Dr. Brad Reedy says in his Evoke Therapy podcast that challenging symptoms and behaviors can be traced back to an original wound. We, in Science of Mind, might say that there is something to heal and something to reveal. He further explains that according to Carl Jung, our behaviors are substitutes for suffering. That it's easy to forget that symptoms do their job by masking and distracting us from the grief, fear, and pain of what had happened. That when we can go back and give those wounds a voice, allow them to speak and to be heard, that true healing can occur. Symptoms are frustrating and sometimes hurtful, and we can lose our compassion with each other and with ourselves. We might be tempted to ask in frustration, what is wrong with you? Or what is wrong with me? Our authors suggest that we ask the question, what happened to you? Or what happened to me instead? They say that with this question, what happened to you? We have a shift in perspective that honors the power of the past to shape our current functioning. Dr. Reedy suggests that everybody has the responsibility to work on their wounds, otherwise they are unconscious. But how do we do this? Dr. Bruce Perry explains in detail in our book that he explains in our book how our brain stores memory, and specifically trauma memories. He explains in great detail, and we're just going to scratch the surface. I encourage you to pick up a copy of the book if you're interested in his very detailed description of our brain and memories. But he says that when we can understand how our brains work, we can better understand the symptoms and behaviors that no longer serve us. And then we can work to heal them. He shares a story of one of his clients from early in his practice of psychology. His client's name is Mike Roseman, and Mike is a veteran of the Korean War and had seen lots and lots of combat. He had classic PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. He He also suffered from anxiety, sleep issues, depression, and he sometimes had flashbacks where he felt like he was back in the war and in combat. He was beginning to manage some of these challenging behaviors and even was recovering from alcoholism with his therapy with Dr. Perry. At the time of this particular story, Mike had called Dr. Perry very upset and asked for an impromptu appointment. Mike and his girlfriend Sally both came to the appointment. Mike was visibly upset, and Sally was very supportive and kind. At the beginning of the appointment, Mike blurted out, "Can you explain PTSD to her? Can you explain to her why I am all messed up?" And he started to cry. He asked, "What is wrong with me? Korea was over 30 years ago." Dr. Perry asked him what had recently happened that had upset him. Mike and Sally had been to a nice dinner and were walking to the movies when suddenly Mike was on the ground with his hands over his head, feeling like he was being shot at. He said he realized a motorcycle had backfired and that it had sounded like gunfire. When Sally tried to reassure him while he was in this state, he struggled against her and even hit her. Dr. Perry explained that Mike's brain had adapted to the continuous threat of gunfire while he was in Korea, and that the original adaptive and protective memory was still there. Sally asked if Mike could unlearn this because he didn't need it anymore. They discussed how it was understandable how it had served Mike in Korea, but that these behaviors were not serving him now. And could he just unlearn it? Dr. Perry explains that not all memories are in the part of the brain that we can control. Trauma settles into the primitive part of our brain, the reptilian brain, as sometimes it's called, along with the behaviors that serve to protect us and to help us manage the traumatic experience. At the time of the experience, these behaviors are adaptive and helpful, but now in the current time, they're maladaptive, and that they're creating problems. Our reptilian brain gets wired when we are exposed to trauma, and it is super fast acting. It propels us into fight, flight, or freeze to protect us in the moment and to protect us into the future. That is its primary job, to protect us. And interestingly, our primitive brain has no sense of time. It has no idea how many years have passed since the original threat. When it gets triggered, the current experience is very much in the here and now, activating all of our stress responses: fight, flight, or freeze. The interesting thing is that when our reptilian brain engages, the higher ordered parts of our brains that tell time and other reasoning get temporarily shut down. When this happens, our brains are doing exactly what they are designed to do. When we don't understand this, it can be confusing and disruptive in our current lives. Sensory inputs such as sight, smells, sounds, touch, and taste can elicit or evoke a trauma memory. Sometimes we know where a trauma memory came from, and often we have no clue until we realize that we are having symptoms of trauma. And this can be really, really surprising and confusing. I have had such an experience. I stopped drinking alcohol about 5 years ago. And one evening in the first month or two of my sobriety, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner, like I did many evenings during the week. One of my housemates came home, and it was clear that he had been drinking. And while this didn't bother me per se, as we were having pleasant conversation and I continued cooking, I became aware that my body was starting to move into freeze mode. And I started feeling hypervigilant. I was feeling like I was a little bit out of my body. I later explained to my therapist that my body's responding bigger than the situation called for, and that at the time it took a little while for it to get back to a normal feeling. I had never had that experience, and I was really curious as to what may have caused it. She explained to me that this was a trauma response, and I was really surprised by that. I felt that I had had a pretty cushy childhood, and I couldn't really recall any situations that I would count as traumatic. But she reminded me that my mother was an alcoholic and explained that I was experiencing a typical response of a child of alcoholic parents. I told her that I didn't remember feeling threatened or unsafe as a child, but that I could understand that the unpredictable behavior of my mom could have been uncomfortable to my younger self. Through several subsequent therapy sessions and reading on my own part about trauma and trauma response, I began to understand a little bit more about trauma and triggers. With Dr. Perry's description of how memories can be stored, I now better understand why my adult self reacted like my child self. My clue was that the feeling I was feeling was bigger than the situation warranted. And I also knew that I didn't want to feel that way, and I wanted to understand it better. I used my therapy as well as my spiritual tools of meditation, prayer, and sometimes journaling to process this new information and to get to a more comfortable place. Dr. Reedy says, you didn't cause it, but now it's your responsibility and that you can work through it. Dr. Perry writes, so many phenomena of everyday life are directly linked to this process of the brain making sense of the world by creating associations and making memories. This is why asking what happened to you is so important in understanding what is going on with us now. Brian Collison writes in his blog entitled Symbolism of Home, The Journey to Our Inner House. The inner journey toward home connects with the outer journey, but has its own particular character. It's concerned with coming to understand and to be compassionate toward our own inner being. The inner journey home often involves issues of difficulties in our present day lives that beckon us to look at aspects of our life in the past. We may encounter the symptoms of anxiety and/or depression, or find ourselves coming up against parts of our personality shaped by wounds sustained in earlier parts of our life. Questions of identity and past wounding may get stirred up by a major life transition. When we begin to understand, acknowledge, and process how our past experience has shaped us, we come to a place of increasing acceptance and compassion for ourselves. This is connecting with what is often referred to as feeling at home in our own skin. Another way of imagining the journey home. So where does this leave our little acorn? Our authors write that by asking the question, what happened to you? We can help each other to know a little more about how experiences, both good and bad, shape us. That by understanding some of the scientific concepts, we can gain insights to help us all live better, more fulfilling lives. What can we do while we are learning and processing this? We can be gentle with ourselves. We can know that there is nothing broken or needing to be fixed. We can allow the unfolding to happen in its proper time. We can know that the truth that we came into this planet with resides in us, that we are enough, we are lovable, and we are deserving. We are deserving of all that the divine has. So let's take a breath and ease into a little moment of meditation here together. I invite you to take a breath and then another, knowing that where God is, we are too, and that this perfection is home. Our little acorn our God self, lives in the present, not in the past and not in the future. This moment is the only one that truly exists. As you take a breath, I invite you to settle your body into your space, whether you are sitting or lying down. You may want to soften your eyes, or they might drift closed. Allow your breath to deepen. Flowing past your nostrils, past your throat, into your heart space, and finding its way into your belly. Bringing your attention into your body as you follow your breath. Noticing in this moment that any thoughts that float by can be released. Release any moments, any thoughts of doing it right. With your next breath, I invite you to set an intention for this time, clearing space to acknowledge the truth of home. That your inner self, your acorn self, holds everything that you need. Following your breath as it enters your body, every breath a reminder of your connection with the divine. Every breath a reminder that you are always home. As your breath deepens and slows, let your thoughts drift away. You don't need them right now. You may have thoughts that come from memories. You might feel a little curious about them. Knowing that they are there when you are ready, there is no need to force or hurry them. Let these thoughts drift peacefully through. Consider the little acorn, your infant self, your God self. How sweet and perfect you are. Feel the love that resides in your inner home. The love that you receive and the love that you give. This love is constant and complete and unconditional. I invite you to put your hands either on your heart or on your solar plexus, or maybe both, and just feel that love. Imagine your home, your acorn, or whatever else that you imagine that is inside, that is your God self, that it is perfect and whole and complete. Mm. That whatever our conditions are, they are not the truth. Mm. Our love shines out and it shines in. Mm. And just breathe in this knowing. Mm. And with your next breath, I invite you back into your space. To wiggle your toes. To wiggle your fingers. Flutter your eyes. Knowing that each of your breaths is like the breath of God, connecting you with the divine, your inner knowing, in your home. With much gratitude. Have a beautiful rest of your week. Namaste.